Ford's biggest station wagon failures you never heard about. Ford built a station wagon so badly engineered that the roof could buckle inward during what should have been a survivable accident. They created another wagon so expensive and unreliable that dealers refused to stock it after the first year. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they manufactured a compact wagon where engineers documented fatal design flaws, calculated the cost of human life, and decided it was cheaper to let people burn than fix the problem. These aren't the nostalgic stories Ford wants you to remember when you think about wood-paneled wagons and family road trips. These are the disasters that cost lives, destroyed consumer trust, and ultimately killed Ford's entire wagon business. The failures buried in company archives, the engineering reports that were ignored, the warnings that went unheeded. And what makes these stories even more shocking is this. In almost every case, Ford knew. They had the data. They had the warnings. They chose profit over safety, styling over structure, cost-cutting over common sense. You're about to discover why an entire generation of American families learned never to trust Ford with their children's lives. From structural nightmares that collapsed in minor collisions to fuel tanks that exploded in rear-end impacts, from transmissions that self-destructed to quality controls so poor that vehicles left the factory already broken. This is the untold history of Ford's wagon disasters. So what was the first catastrophe? It happened in 1957, and it involved something so fundamental you'd think no engineer could possibly get it wrong, making sure the roof stays attached to the car. But before we dive into the carnage, you need to understand just how high the stakes were. In the 1950s and 60s, station wagons weren't just another vehicle category. They were the symbol of American family life. Every suburban driveway had one. Every family vacation happened in one. Every trip to Little League, every Sunday drive, every camping expedition, it all happened in a station wagon. The numbers were staggering. By the early 60s, nearly 1 in 4 cars sold in America was a station wagon. Think about that. 1 in 4. Ford and Chevrolet were locked in a blood war over this market. Both companies knew that winning the wagon battle meant winning the loyalty of families, and families meant repeat customers for decades. When you sold a young couple their first wagon, you weren't just making one sale. You were potentially capturing that family for life, the next wagon, the sedan for the teenager, every vehicle purchase for the next 30 years. The financial stakes were astronomical. But here's what made these failures so devastating. These weren't sports cars for enthusiasts or luxury vehicles for the wealthy. These were daily transportation for regular families, working fathers commuting to the office, mothers driving children to school, families packed in tight for cross-country vacations. When a sports car failed, it was disappointing. When a wagon failed, especially catastrophically, it was betrayal. Parents had trusted Ford with their most precious cargo. So when Ford cut corners, when engineers' warnings were ignored, when cost accountants overruled safety concerns, the consequences weren't just financial. They were measured in destroyed lives and shattered trust. Now, with that context, let me tell you about the first major disaster, and I promise you, it's worse than you think. Failure number 1. The 1957 to 1958 Ford Country sedan structural disaster. The year was 1957, and Ford was celebrating. Their completely redesigned full-size lineup was turning heads everywhere. Lower, longer, wider, wrapped in chrome and two-tone paint schemes that screamed modern American optimism. The country sedan wagon looked absolutely spectacular sitting in showrooms under bright fluorescent lights. But there was a problem, a deadly problem, hiding in plain sight. Ford's designers had gotten carried away. In their quest to create that low, sleek profile everyone wanted, they'd made the roof pillars thinner. The C-pillar, that critical rear roof support, was dramatically weakened compared to previous years. The reinforcement structure that should have been there simply wasn't adequate for a vehicle this large carrying this much weight. At first, nobody noticed. The wagons drove beautifully. They looked fantastic. Families loaded them up with kids and luggage and headed off on vacation. Everything seemed fine. Then came a Saturday afternoon in Dearborn, Michigan. A country sedan was stopped at a red light when another car rear-ended it at perhaps 25 miles per hour. Nothing dramatic, just typical suburban traffic. The kind of accident that happens thousands of times every day across America. But what happened next wasn't typical at all. The rear roof pillar buckled. The roof collapsed inward. The rear window shattered. What should have been a minor insurance claim became a nightmare that sent 2 children to the hospital with head injuries. Ford's initial response? They blamed the other driver, called it an unusually severe impact, suggested the damage was exaggerated. But then more reports started coming in. Pennsylvania. But California. Different accidents, different circumstances, same terrifying result. Roofs collapsing in impacts that shouldn't have caused such damage. Now here's where the story gets truly damning. Internal Ford engineering documents, which didn't surface until decades later during unrelated litigation, showed that engineers had raised concerns during the development process. They'd warned that the structural integrity was compromised. They'd recommended additional reinforcement. But the styling department pushed back. Those reinforcements would add weight. They'd require design changes. They'd cost money. And Ford was in a rush to get these new models to market before Chevrolet could respond. So the warnings were noted, filed away, and ignored. How many families were affected? Ford never released official numbers, and most accidents never made the newspapers. But insurance company records suggest dozens of incidents where country sedan roofs failed in ways that previous Ford wagons would have handled without serious damage. Ford eventually made running changes to the 58 models, quietly adding reinforcement mid-year. No recall was issued. No public acknowledgement was made. But the damage to Ford's reputation was already done. Sales dropped. Consumer Reports mentioned structural concerns in their reviews. And Chevrolet's advertising started emphasizing the solid, safe construction of their wagons, never mentioning Ford by name but making the implication crystal clear. But as bad as this structural disaster was, it was just the beginning. Because Ford's next wagon catastrophe was attached to what would become the most infamous product failure in American automotive history. Stay with me, because the Edsel story gets even worse than you've heard. Failure number 2, the 1958 to 1960 Edsel station wagons. If you know automotive history, you know the Edsel name is synonymous with disaster. It's the punchline to jokes about corporate hubris. But here's what most people don't know. The Edsel station wagons, the Villager, Bermuda, and Roundup models, weren't just part of the Edsel failure. They were the absolute worst performers in an already catastrophic product line. Let me paint you a picture of what happened. It's September of 1957, and Ford launches Edsel as a completely new brand, positioned to capture buyers moving up from Ford but not ready for Mercury prices. The hype was unlike anything the industry had seen. Ford spent over $250 million on development and marketing. To put that in perspective, that was more than Ford had spent launching any previous brand in company history. The Edsel wagons were supposed to be the practical family vehicles that would anchor the brand, steady, reliable income while the flashier sedans grabbed headlines. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Absolutely everything went wrong. Start with that face. The infamous vertical grille that critics said looked like a toilet seat, or an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon, or comparisons I won't repeat in polite company. Now, styling is subjective, but when your design becomes a national joke before the car even goes on sale, you've got problems. But the wagons suffered from issues far beyond aesthetics. The build quality was catastrophic. See, Edsel shared assembly lines with Ford and Mercury vehicles, and the workers were already stretched thin meeting production quotas. Now they had to deal with Edsel-specific parts, unique procedures, different specifications, all while maintaining the same production pace. The result was predictable: chaos. Those push-button transmission controls mounted in the steering wheel hub? They malfunctioned constantly. The teletouch transmission system? Failed at rates that shocked even Ford's own quality control people. And the wagons, being more complex with their longer bodies, additional weight, rear-facing seats, and extra features, suffered even worse than the sedans. Tailgates that wouldn't open or wouldn't close. Power windows that stopped working in the first month. Self-adjusting brakes that didn't adjust. Electrical systems that seemed possessed by demons. Owners reported problems that seemed almost comical if they weren't so expensive and dangerous. One Bermuda wagon owner in Illinois reported that his power tailgate window would randomly open while driving down the highway. Another owner in New Jersey had a Villager where the push-button transmission would shift into reverse on its own. Imagine that, driving down the road when suddenly your transmission decides to engage reverse. But here's where the failure became truly spectacular: the pricing. The Edsel Bermuda wagon, the top model, started at $3,155. Now think about what that meant. You could buy a proven Chevrolet Nomad for less money. You could get a Ford Country Squire, from a brand you trusted, for hundreds less. Or you could gamble on this untested Edsel with the weird face and the push buttons that didn't work. Families shopping for wagons are practical people. They need reliability. They need their vehicle to work every single day, taking kids to school, hauling groceries, pulling the camping trailer. They can't afford a vehicle that spends half its time in the shop. Word spread fast. Within months, Edsel dealers were getting calls from angry wagon owners. By the first winter, service departments were overwhelmed. And here's the truly devastating part. Ford couldn't fix the problems fast enough. Parts weren't available. Mechanics weren't trained properly. The entire support infrastructure was inadequate. By late 1958, Edsel wagon sales had collapsed completely. The expensive Bermuda was quietly discontinued after just 1 year. The other wagon models limped along, but dealers stopped ordering them. Many dealers, faced with unsold Edsel wagons taking up valuable lot space, actually sold them at a loss just to get rid of them. By 1960, the entire Edsel brand was dead. Ford lost hundreds of millions of dollars. But the financial loss wasn't even the worst part. The real damage was to Ford's credibility. They'd told America to trust them with a brand new vehicle. They'd promised quality and reliability. And they delivered a disaster that became a cultural punchline. But as catastrophic as the Edsel failure was, Ford's next wagon disaster would prove even more damaging. Because the next failure didn't just cost money and reputation, it cost lives. And Ford knew it would. Failure number 3, the 1971 to 1980 Ford Pinto wagon. You've heard of the Pinto's exploding gas tank. It's one of the most notorious safety scandals in automotive history. But here's what gets buried. The Pinto wagon was significantly more dangerous than the sedan, and Ford's internal documents prove they knew it. The Pinto debuted in '71 as Ford's answer to fuel-efficient imports. The wagon variant followed shortly. From outside, it looked like a practical small family hauler, perfect for young couples on a budget. Underneath sat a design so flawed it would kill people. The fundamental problem was fuel tank placement, mounted behind the rear axle with minimal protection. In a rear-end collision, even moderate speed, the tank could rupture and the filler neck could separate, spilling gasoline. Impact sparks ignited the fuel. This was deadly in the sedan. In the wagon, it was worse. The wagon's extended rear body made the fuel tank even more vulnerable. The longer overhang behind the rear wheels created more crumple distance, which sounds protective until you realize that crumple space included the fuel tank. Ford's own crash tests showed the wagon had higher fuel tank rupture likelihood than the sedan in comparable rear impacts. Now here's the truly disturbing part. Internal Ford documents, revealed during lawsuits, showed engineers identified the problem and proposed fixes. A rubber bladder inside the tank would dramatically reduce rupture risk. Cost? About $11 per vehicle. Ford's response? A cost-benefit analysis. They compared the $11 fix across projected production against estimated lawsuit payouts from death and injury claims. The calculation, paying lawsuits was cheaper than the fix. Read that again. Ford did the math and decided paying grieving families was more cost-effective than spending $11 per car to prevent deaths. Think about what that means. Some executives sat in a meeting, reviewed these numbers, and approved production. Some engineer raised safety concerns and was overruled. Some accountant calculated the value of human life and found it wanting. The Pinto wagon stayed in production from '71 to '80. During that time, estimates suggest between 27 and 180 people died in Pinto fuel tank fires. Numbers vary depending on sources, but even the lowest estimate is 27 preventable deaths. 27 families destroyed. 27 funerals Ford could have prevented for $11 per car. The scandal eventually forced a recall in '78. 1.5 million Pintos recalled. But the damage was catastrophic. An entire generation learned to distrust Ford's commitment to safety. Congressional hearings examined Ford's cost-benefit analysis. News reports called it corporate murder. The phrase, Pinto fires, entered American vocabulary as shorthand for corporate negligence. And the Pinto wagon, that innocent-looking family vehicle? It became a symbol of everything wrong with American corporate culture, where profit mattered more than human life. Business schools still teach the Pinto case as the ultimate cautionary tale about ethical failure. But Ford's wagon disasters weren't finished. Not even close. Because even after the Pinto nightmare taught them expensive lessons about safety and trust, Ford still had more ways to fail wagon buyers. The next disaster was different, nobody died, but it showed Ford still hadn't learned the fundamental lesson about what wagon buyers actually needed. Ford's biggest station wagon failures you never heard about. Failure number 4, the 1982 to 1988 Ford Ltd wagon. After the Pinto catastrophe, you'd expect Ford to be extraordinarily careful with their next wagon. Instead, they created the '82 Ltd wagon, proof you can make something too small. Early '80s. Gas prices high. Fuel economy the buzzword. Ford strategy? Take the legendary LTD name, which meant big, comfortable, reliable family wagon, and slap it on a dramatically downsized platform. The 82 LTD wagon was built on Ford's Fox platform, same as the Fairmont. Overnight, the LTD went from full-size hauler to mid-size pretender. Wagon buyers revolted. Here's what Ford missed. People buying wagons wanted space. Sure, they wanted better mileage, but not at the cost of cargo capacity and towing ability. The new LTD was 15 inches shorter and 500 pounds lighter. The rear-facing third seat was so cramped only small children fit. Cargo space dropped dramatically. Towing capacity? Rated for 2,000 pounds, but the wagon struggled with modest trailers. The transmission overheated. The small V8 felt strained. The Fox platform wasn't engineered for wagon stresses. Families loading to capacity found rear suspension sagging, body flex causing door problems, and general flimsiness. Consumer reports noted compromised utility and questionable value. The traditional wagon buyer, your suburban father needing to haul plywood and kids, didn't want this compromise. He wanted his big wagon back, or he'd buy a Caprice instead. Ford kept it in production through '88, but the writing was clear. By trying to please everyone, the LTD wagon pleased no one. But Ford had one more disaster coming, one that would cement their reputation for unreliable family vehicles. Failure number 5, the 1992 to 1999 Ford Taurus wagon. The Taurus sedan revolutionized Ford in the mid-'80s. The wagon arrived shortly after, and initially seemed promising. Then the '92 redesign happened. Everything went wrong. The second-generation Taurus wagon became infamous for reliability problems that made Consumer Reports beg people to avoid them. Start with the transmission. The AX4S automatic seemed fine in testing but proved catastrophic in real use. Wagons carry heavy loads constantly. The AX4S couldn't handle it. Failures were epidemic. Owners reported problems at 30,000 miles. By 60,000, many needed complete rebuilds costing $2,500 to $3,500. For families who bought used Taurus wagons for $8,000, that was devastating. Many abandoned the vehicles. The 3.8 V6 had head gasket problems. Coolant mixed with oil, destroying engines. Repairs exceeded $2,000. Electrical gremlins plagued them. Power windows failed. Instrument clusters went dark. Door locks cycled randomly, locking drivers out. The rear wiper motor, positioned where salt and moisture attacked it, failed constantly. Salvage yards couldn't keep used units in stock. Consumer Reports gave Taurus wagons their dreaded red, meaning much worse than average reliability. They specifically warned consumers away, citing potentially catastrophic transmission problems. For Ford, this was humiliating. The Taurus was supposed to prove American quality matched Japanese competitors. Instead, the wagon became a cautionary tale. Sales plummeted. By '99, it was discontinued. Families moved to minivans and SUVs from Honda, Toyota, and Chrysler that actually worked. Now you might think these are isolated incidents. But there's a disturbing pattern here. Why Ford kept failing ***. 5 major wagon failures spanning 4 decades. Different eras, different problems. But watch what happens when we connect the dots. First pattern, prioritizing style over structure every time. The 57-country sedan's roof problems came from making it sleeker. The Edsel's styling overshadowed practical needs. Engineers raised concerns. Stylists won the arguments. Second pattern, catastrophic cost-cutting. The Pinto's $11 fix. The LTD's inadequate platform. The Taurus transmission. Ford saved dollars per vehicle and lost millions in reputation. But worse, they lost trust. Third pattern, ignoring what wagon buyers wanted. Wagon customers needed space, reliability, safety. They weren't buying fashion statements. Yet Ford treated wagons as styling exercises. The Edsel was overly complex. The LTD sacrificed utility. The Taurus prioritized sedans over wagon-specific engineering. Fourth pattern, inadequate real-world testing. Wagons carry heavier loads, tow trailers, run stop-and-go with kids and gear. Ford tested sedans and assumed wagons would perform similarly. They never did. Fifth pattern, slow response to problems. Ford knew about issues long before taking action. Engineers raised red flags that executives ignored. Complaints accumulated for months or years. Recalls came late. Compared to competitors, Honda fixed Accord wagon problems immediately. Toyota overcorrected to ensure confidence. Volvo made safety paramount. Ford's failures weren't bad luck. They were systematic failures of corporate culture and values. Ford's executives had all the information. They saw patterns. They read reports. But short-term thinking and cost pressures led to the same mistakes repeatedly. By the late 90s, American wagons were dead. But why did Ford abandon them entirely? Why Ford abandoned wagons entirely? By 2000, Ford had completely exited the American wagon market. The Taurus limped to discontinuation in '99. Ford never looked back. But abandoning wagons wasn't just about changing markets. It was about Ford's failures making the business case impossible. Think about Ford's perspective in the late 90s. Every recent wagon had problems. Reputation damage was severe. Consumer reports rated Ford wagons below competitors. Quality surveys showed more problems than sedans. Resale value was terrible. Meanwhile, minivans were booming. Ford had the Windstar. SUVs were exploding. Ford had the Explorer, the best-selling SUV in America. Why fix the wagon business when you had successful alternatives? Here's what's interesting. Ford continued selling wagons in Europe. The Mondeo wagon sold well. The Focus wagon remained popular. But European buyers didn't have the same reputation baggage. They saw Ford as mainstream and reliable. But in America, the wagon reputation was poisoned beyond repair. Ford couldn't compete with Subaru's reliability reputation. They couldn't match Volvo's safety image. They certainly couldn't overcome their own history. Ford executives briefly considered bringing European wagons to America. But market research showed consumers interested in wagons had moved to other brands. The few remaining wagon buyers were loyal to Subaru, Audi, or Volvo. Ford's brand equity in wagons was completely destroyed. So Ford made a calculated decision: don't fight to recover a market you destroyed. Focus on SUVs and crossovers. It was pragmatic, even smart, but it also represented surrender. Ford had been a wagon pioneer. They dominated for years, and their failures drove them completely out. Ford doesn't sell a single station wagon in the United States. The closest thing is the Expedition, a massive SUV sharing nothing with the wagons we've discussed except hauling families. And honestly, Ford probably made the right decision. But here's what matters. These failures were preventable, every single one. The 57-country sedan's structural problems? Solved with proper engineering priority. The Edsel disaster? Avoided with realistic planning and quality control. The Pinto's deadly design? Fixed with an $11 part. The downsized LTD? Could have worked with honest marketing. The Taurus transmission? Prevented with proper testing. These weren't inevitable market forces or unforeseeable limitations. These were choices, conscious decisions by executives who prioritized short-term profits, styling trends, or cost savings over the fundamental responsibility of building safe, reliable family vehicles. The consequences went beyond financial losses and reputation damage. There were real human costs. Families injured in Pinto fires. Children traumatized when roofs collapsed. People financially devastated by transmission failures they couldn't afford. Fathers who lost trust in their ability to protect their families because the vehicle they'd chosen had failed them. That's the real legacy. For those who remember these vehicles, there's bittersweet nostalgia. Many learned to drive in wagons. We took family road trips. We have memories of rear-facing seats and wood paneling and that distinctive wagon smell. But we also remember the breakdowns, the safety fears, the disappointment when Ford let us down again. Something was lost when wagons died. The station wagon represented a specific American ideal. Ford had the chance to perfect that ideal. Instead, failure after failure, they destroyed it. Did you or your family own any of these Ford wagons? Share your stories in the comments below.